Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Hannah, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Matt?
Thanks for doing this. You're all about education, and you were homeschooled, and we're going to dig into all of that. But I specifically want to talk to you because there's such an opportunity right now with parents who have been. I love to use the word red pilled, even though it's taken on some political connotations, which I do not intend. But a lot of parents over the last 3 years have discovered all of these insane flaws in the top-down, one-size-fits-all public or government education system, and we can get into those. But I think the one that shocks a lot of parents is just the sort of the mindless regimentation of what we consider the education system, which doesn't make any sense to me. But I wanted to get you to give people a sense for who you are and why you decided to start Rebel Educator, which is your new platform. I guess it's a set of tools, curriculum. What would you call it?
It's a set of resources. It's a starting point. It's intended to be a jumping off point for parents who know basically what you just said, that the school system is not the best place to be educating their kids, but they don't really know what to do next, which is a very large subset of parents.
Yeah.
It's
very intimidating.
It's very intimidating. It's also really hard to find resources. They're very siloed right now. There is no good central jumping off point where you can type into Google, like, what do I do with my kid that's not public school? And then you get a definitive starting place.
Yeah.
You kind of have to know somebody who's in an alternative school or is reading some weird blog that they can send you or something to fall down the rabbit hole. So like our goal is to just be the jumping off point for people so we can reach as many people as possible and give them, like, we're not building a school or a specific curriculum. We can direct parents to everything that's out there that's happening so they can figure out what are the right questions to be asking, how should I think about educating my kid, what resources are available to me, and then how do I go about choosing one.
And even just realizing that your preconceived notions about what education is and what teaching is, maybe just suspend that for a little bit and rethink and maybe reimagine based on everything that you saw that was awful during these Zoom classrooms and other forms of torture that we imposed on our children over the last 3 years. And we'll get more into that, but you are probably into this because you, in fact, were homeschooled yourself. Tell us a little bit about this crazy story. Like, why would your parents let you just run wild like that?
That is a really great question. I'm kind of work in education entirely by accident. I just sort of like grew up in this very alternative education world being homeschooled. And then I skipped college to go work for a college alternative program called Praxis that was like a startup apprenticeship program for people who want to skip business school. And then by the time I left that, I was like, okay, I think I just work in education. Like, I think this is my thing. But I went to a private Montessori inspired preschool and kindergarten. So I was 6 when my parents decided to homeschool me 1st through 12th grade. And I was the oldest kid, so I was the big experiment. And it was just sort of like, I remember my parents.
So you were the guinea pig.
I was the guinea pig,
Are there any issues that you were the test case?
I mean, so I have one younger sister, and my parents definitely did things differently with her. There were definitely things they had learned.
Fewer mistakes.
But yeah, but I don't look back at it and feel like it was like there were any big like, wow, we definitely wouldn't have done that again kind of moments. Maybe my parents would say something different. I think I had a great experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, my parents, it was a big experiment. They were like, we're going to do this for 1st grade. We're going to see how it goes. And then we just kind of kept re-upping for 12 more years. But it was a really great experience. We, school is it wastes a lot of kids' time. So when you're not in a classroom for 7 hours a day, when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, you can get all of the things you need to do done in like 2 hours. And then you can have a childhood with the rest of that time. So I grew up loving learning because it was just sort of enmeshed with all of the things that I naturally wanted to do as a kid. Like I wanted to go play in the woods, and we go for walks, and my mom would be like, look at all the mushrooms that come after it rained. Like let's study botany and learn how mushrooms work. And it was just this like very organic evolving process. And then when I was in middle school and high school, I became a lot more academic, and I spent a lot of time watching like recorded video lectures from college professors on YouTube and through companies like The Great Courses. And I realized when I was in high school that I thought I was college bound. And I was like, this is a terrible idea because it's going to be boring comparing to what I'm doing in high school. But
talk about like one of my theories, one of my sources of optimism for all the things we could be pessimistic about with young people in education and what's being done to them in terms of, I hate to use the word indoctrination, but standardization maybe is a fairer way to say it. But you were able to curate a curriculum. You probably didn't call it a curriculum. You're just like, oh, I'm interested in this, and you went out and found it. Talk about that process, because that to me is like there's a secret of success in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's weird. I've had to think about this a lot as an adult to try to figure out what happened, because it was just sort of a natural process. Yeah. As a caveat, I was a very academic kid, so I was really interested in like weird niche academic subjects. Like I wanted to go deep down the rabbit hole studying anatomy and find like videos of cadaver dissections and understand what people actually learn when they're preparing to be a doctor. And I wanted to go and like read Greek classics because I thought Oedipus Rex was a really great story, and I wanted to read all the other tragedies. So I was like naturally very inclined towards the things that are sort of considered to be the building blocks of like a good classical traditional education. I don't think that that's important for every kid who's homeschooled or unschooled or goes through any other alternative path to do those things.
That was just your path.
That was just my path. But I think it does make my path an interesting case study, because you can really easily contrast it with like what you would be doing if you were going to a high level school. But my path was very curiosity driven. Like, again, I was the first kid, so we didn't really know what we were doing. And my parents wanted to make sure that I could go to college if I wanted to. So like this is a list of boxes that we have to make sure is being checked. And you have to make sure that you like have the standard stuff that you would need to put on a college application if you wanted to go. But beyond that, I could kind of do whatever I wanted. So I was just like...
Were there legal barriers? So, because that is an issue.
Yeah.
Depending on what state you're in.
Yeah. So I grew up in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a fairly regulated state when it comes to homeschooling. There's a lot more. Like we had to go to a state certified evaluator every year, and they had to look over my portfolio and then write a letter that we had to submit with the portfolio to the school every year so that they could review it and be like, yeah, we're technically responsible for you because you're in our district and you technically did everything you needed to move on to the next grade. Some states you don't have to do that at all. You can just like say you're homeschooling and no one ever checks in with you again.
Yeah.
But there definitely were legal requirements, which has good things and bad things. Like it's, there's standards that you have to meet that you may or may not agree with, but it also...
I'm from Pennsylvania. It's possible that the teachers' unions have quite a grip on the system there. I'm just speculating.
I will also say I don't live in Pennsylvania anymore for reasons that may or may not be related, but But Pennsylvania was a regulated one. But it didn't have that much of a bearing on the day-to-day, really.
So when you finished homeschooling, and you still had a piece of paper that said you had a high school level education.
Pennsylvania, because it's more regulated, there's different state accredited organizations that you can get a diploma through. So I have a piece of paper that says that the state of Pennsylvania recognizes that I got a high school level education. I've never used it for anything. It's like in a box somewhere, right. But I do have it.
I think I read somewhere or heard somewhere you talking about the fact that homeschooling wasn't a liability for you finding a job. In fact, it was like the secret handshake, like I'm homeschooled, so I'm worth hiring.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, people freak out about homeschooling. It's been really interesting, actually, to start talking more and more about homeschooling as I embarked on my adult life. And I was like, there's a lot here that was interesting that I want to talk about. And I got a lot of pushback from people who freaked out about the fact that I was advocating for homeschooling. But, and yes, there are people who come out of homeschool environments who are not ready to enter the real world, but that's not exclusive to homeschooling. There are people coming out of public school too.
Yeah, does that happen in the public system?
Well, a few times, yeah. Once in a while, it does seem to happen. But it was like for the types of work I wanted to do and the types of places I ended up, I kept getting people responding to my job applications with, "Oh my gosh, we love homeschoolers. We want to work with you." Like there are colleges that prioritize homeschool applicants because they know that they're more prepared for college academics than public school kids are. There are employers who want to work with homeschool kids. It's really not the deficit that people think it is, but there's a lot of stigma against it. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's a caricature that we all know about how you're unsocialized, and of course you didn't meet the rigorous criteria imposed in the government system. But my predilection just tells me that that's all BS, and I think the data backs that up.
100%. Yeah, I think if anything, like I noticed this. So one of the first things that I did after I graduated from high school and I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I started teaching classes to my old homeschool group because I was a writer, so I taught writing classes. And then one of the moms who had her kids in my homeschool writing class she worked at an after school program, and she hired me to teach writing classes there too. And that was the first time that I'd really seen homeschoolers and public schoolers side by side and could like measure the differences in them. And it was wild to me to see, like, I was walking these two groups of people through the same curriculum that I developed, and the results or the response of these two groups of people was so different. The homeschoolers, like, the reason I started teaching this class was because there was a whole cohort of kids in my old homeschool group who didn't want to write. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I'm going to teach your kid, like, my value proposition is I'm going to make your kids like writing. I'm not going to teach them any grammar. I'm not going to teach them how to write a 5-paragraph essay, but they're going to enjoy the process of writing by the time I'm done with them. And that's what I did. I taught them how to write fiction, and I had creative writing prompts. And at the beginning of the course, nobody wanted to write. And by the end, I had kids coming in who were bringing in, like, stories that they'd written in the week between classes, and they wanted me to read them. And it was like, okay, like, see, writing can be fun. This is not so terrible. You've just been doing it wrong. And then I did the same thing with these kids who were in public school. And one, they didn't really want to talk to me. They were super awkward. Their social skills were terrible. But they also fought me tooth and nail to do the actual assignments. Like, the little kids were okay. Like, the 1st through 3rd graders, they caught on pretty quick and they had fun. But, like, 6th grade and up, they just sit there with their head in their hands at the desk the whole time, and I'd have to sit there and be like, well, like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you look at this prompt? And they'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to me to see, like, because you hear people say this when you talk about homeschoolers. They're like, oh, well, yeah, I know a homeschool kid, and they're, like, really bright and really engaging, and they'd have no problem talking to adults. And I think that's, in my experience, has been incredibly true, because these kids, one, they're not learning that learning's terrible. So they're open to learning new things, and it's fun for them. But they're doing things in the real world while all of the other kids are, like, siloed in these fluorescent lit cinder block boxes all day. And they're actually out talking to adults, and they're interacting in the real world. And so they're developing a higher level of social skills than the kids in the classroom. They might not be great at, like, pop culture references, but that's a terrible metric for socialization anyway. Like, that doesn't matter.
I'm pretty sure they'll figure that out on their own. Yeah.
It took me a while, but I did. So I think yes. But they're learning the things that actually translate to the real world. So I think there's a very strong argument to be made that they're actually better socialized than the public school kids.
Thank you for joining me today on Kibbe on Liberty, and for being part of our fiercely independent audience. Every week, my organization, Free the People, partners with Blaze TV to bring you this show. My guests bring smart perspectives on everything from current events to timeless philosophical debates. If you like what you hear, go to freethepeople.org/KOL and support Kibbe on Liberty so we can continue to produce these honest conversations with interesting people. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, I'm going to throw a pop culture reference at you that you totally won't get because it's too old for you. But there's the Pink Floyd The Wall, iconic album. They made a movie of it, and part of it is you know the song "We Don't Need No Education." Mm-hmm. It's about I think it's such an important message because it's about the the torturous process of just, marching to class and having the teacher yell at you and you just shutting off, and they have all these mindless puppets just marching and not thinking. And I'm a victim of the public school system, so I'm a little bit jealous and envious of you right now. And I hated school. And I think it affected my willingness to do formal education my entire life, because I went from overperforming, and I had a specific teacher that told me I was doing too much. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even think about it, but I think it pissed me off. So the next year I started turning in my test blank, and they held me back, and I was too smart to hold back. And then it was like this whole mess. But I realize in hindsight that I didn't learn anything in school, but I learned a lot outside of school. So I was reading books and all that stuff that awkward teenage boys do, but I didn't learn anything in school. So I'm predisposed to understand what it would be like to actually be free to pursue your passions and to not imagine that all children are the same. I mean, that's the insanity of the one-size-fits-all system, is that each child is beautiful and different and has different abilities and different passions. And if you don't let them pursue that, how would you ever find out what that is?
Exactly. It has the audacity to assume that every child is the same, and that there is one path and one set of goals that is correct, and that some bureaucrat in an office somewhere knows the answer to that question for every kid in the country. Like, when you actually stop and think about it, it's so arrogant, but it's also ridiculous. Like, you talk to people, adults out functioning in the world, and they're living such dynamically varied lives and doing all different types of work and following all different types of paths, and they have different skill sets and areas of knowledge that make them uniquely capable to do very specialized types of work. And the idea that we can engineer your way to get there somehow is really quite ridiculous. Like, there are things that everybody needs to know, and there are like processes for learning that they've been studied and they are effective, and it makes sense for a lot of kids to go through them. But the level of standardization that we have in the average classroom, especially over the past couple of decades, as testing has become more and more important in the classroom, and you spend months preparing for tests and you're not even learning anything else except what's going to be on the test. Like, you're not really learning anything useful at that point, because you take the test and you forget once you've taken the test because you don't care, so you're not going to use brain space on it. But it's the systematized idea of education was a really big misstep. Like, there's political and cultural reasons why it happened. You can go back and look at the history, and it makes a lot of sense how we ended up here. But in terms of preparing individuals to thrive in the real world, it's a terrible move. And there's no one answer to the education problem that is like, this is the thing that everybody should do, because everybody's different. You need a marketplace of education options to serve a very broad array of types of people.
Yeah, you had structural failure that was then federalized so that they could say, we're going to focus on this one thing, which was testing, and it actually just made things worse.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the experience that a lot of parents had starting with schools being shut down in early 2020, and they learned a couple things. I mean, one obvious thing I think they learned was that the teachers' unions and the sort of administrators that controlled the education system were always all about them as opposed to children, and I think that was one. Surely some parents knew that, but I think you're just assuming that the people in charge of education are the best at educating children, and you can trust them to do that.
You would think.
you would think, but so we sort of learned that it's politics and power that has nothing to do with customers, parents, and children, and that's perhaps a harsh wake-up call for a lot of parents, but the other and obviously the second thing they learned was that the curriculums were really weird, and there was a lot of weird stuff in there, and stuff that was really upsetting to a lot of people, and that also was politicized. That people's political agendas corrupted the curriculum, and kids were learning things that didn't make sense to a lot of parents. But the thing that we're talking about, I think, is the most fundamental. And this is featured in a documentary we did on moms who left the government system during the pandemic. It's called Sick Year, and I'm thinking of this one mom in particular who has a son that reminds me of myself when I was that age, just stubborn and uncooperative and hopefully creative and with some potential. And he's sitting in front of these Zoom calls every day. And it's this completely regimented, torturous thing. And he eventually told his mom, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so she had to think outside the box. I think that regimentation and is the most persuasive reason for parents to take that leap and say, we got to do something else. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, well, to go to the COVID question, I think education is going to turn out to be one of the big silver linings of what happened in 2020 and beyond, because it accelerated what was already happening in education by probably a decade.
Yeah.
We were already headed where we're going now, but at a much slower rate. Like, when you think about it, all of the infrastructure for education to change was in place like the minute we all had internet access. Like, once the internet came online, the whole premise of school, with the exception of the childcare component, which there are people working on building different types of startups that are attempting to solve that. And I think there's going to be a lot of different options for that over the next few years starting to emerge. But like, with the exception of that, everything else was the ability to do it better came online. Like, you don't need the teacher in front of the classroom in a centralized physical location anymore, because you can access the information arguably far, far better, because you can find the things that are actually like specialized to where you're at and what you need, not just like the average of whatever classroom you happen to be assigned to. So all of this was going to happen anyway, but everybody saw it. Like, the classroom came home and everybody said, wait, what is going on?
Yeah.
Because the curriculum was terrible, and the pace at which kids were moving through things was really slow, and people had a lot of questions about the actual content their kids were being taught, and the regimentation just like felt even more ridiculous and characterized when it was on Zoom, but it was a representation of what's happening in the classroom anyway, and parents looked at that and they saw it and they're like, wait a second. Like, there's this sort of ignorance is bliss kind of effect when you just send your kids to school, like you said, where the experts are and they know what to do. So you're like, well, my kid's getting A's, so they must be fine.
Yeah.
But then you actually see it and you're like, whoa, hold up a second. But it also shifted the Overton window of what is acceptable, because pre-COVID, people would respond to me talking about homeschooling and they'd be like, I can never have my kids home all day. I can't imagine having my kids home all day. Only weird people do that. And then everybody started working remotely. When a lot of people are still working remotely, so their capacity logistically to have kids at home shifted. But everybody had to do it for a year or more too. So now it's not weird anymore to imagine your kids at home. Like, everybody knows what it's like. And so that's shifted the precedent, I think, for a lot of the online schools that are emerging that are vastly superior to the public school, but like, you have to have your kids at home to do it. I think people just like it forced everyone into the conversation. So I think it changed a lot. But I think, like, you see, there's a lot of investors who are backing education startups now. And there's a lot of, like, elections are swinging based on people's education stances. And there's, like, a lot of movement that's signaling that people really care about this. So even though it's not necessarily, like, as part of the mainstream conversation as it needs to be for real change to happen, like, the momentum is building. It's very different than it's been any time in the past when people have been building alternatives and trying to get people out of school. Like, people are really hungry for this now.
The intransience of the teachers unions refusing to open even when everyone else had. I was baffled. I realized that they have all the power and that they control cities like Chicago and pretty much every city, certainly New York City, Washington, D.C., where we are right now. But they just didn't care what people thought. They thought they had such a stranglehold. And I think what's happening, and I want to get into sort of practical steps that parents can take, but I think what's happening is that enough parents have taken a leap now, and somebody knows somebody that's doing it, so it doesn't seem quite as intimidating. And at some point, that just turns into a tidal wave of people. And I had Corey DeAngelis on, and he was talking all the data, and like it's very much a fundamental shift in not just opinion but actual behavior. But what would you say to a mom who's agreed with everything you said so far, but she's a really busy person?
Well,
and
I think
she's not an educator. What is she supposed to do?
Well, I think first, really quickly, to the point that you just made, with the teachers' unions and the shift that's starting to happen, I think part of the fundamental problem is that the parents are not customers right now, and the kids are not customers. It's like what the teachers' unions know what's best is very much the feeling that everyone is getting.
They've kind of, like, I forget, I won't quote it off the top of my head, but it goes to the point where, like, they sort of imply that they own your kids, and you don't.
They don't imply it; they outright say it. It's pretty horrifying, actually. But like, they're not the kids are not. Nobody cares about the kids, and nobody really cares what the parents think either. And which, if you look at the school board election results from this past election cycle, like, there's you can tell that parents are catching on, which is very
Are you talking
good,
about
but,
those domestic terrorists?
Well, I mean, I was homeschooled, so those are my people.
You must be on a list somewhere.
I'm sure I'm on a list. Yes, for daring to read books at home instead of go to public school.
Crazy.
It's terrifying. But anyway, like the public school teachers are, like, I think there's going to be a shift as people move away from public schools, where, like, right now the public school is a monopoly, so it doesn't matter the level of customer experience that they are delivering because everyone has to go there. But we're going to see this very quickly, especially in places like Arizona, where the ESA stuff passes through and we start and people actually have a free market for options finally, and people start leaving the public schools. Like, the public schools are going to have to improve in order to keep kids at all, or all the teachers are going to have to be out looking for jobs. So I think this is going to shift quickly, and it's going to come back into balance because it's very out of balance right now.
You could
and
also
the incentives are terrible.
Yeah, you could also see, like, megapod schools where the best teachers can actually be allowed to teach and make more money doing something out of the system. So there's going to be a drain of talent too.
There already is. There's some serious teacher shortages because people are leaving. I talk to so many people on Twitter, which is where I spend a lot of my time, who are ex-teachers who are out starting a micro school or a self-directed learning center or something like that because they just can't stand the system anymore, but they really want to work with kids. There's a lot of really great teachers in that position, building things that I'm very excited to see expand because I think they're some of the primary experts on what we need next.
Rebel educators.
Exactly.
Yeah,
my kind of people. But to your question about the mom who's really busy and what she should do, there are a lot of options out there to cater to a lot of different people's needs and circumstances. So it kind of depends on, there's sort of like a set of questions that a parent needs to ask to narrow down the options, which is like, how much money am I willing to spend? Am I willing to spend money on my kid's education? Based on that question, like, what are the resources actually available to me in my state? Because Arizona gets all the press, but there are a lot of other states that have grant programs and stuff too that you can also look into. Do I want to be the primary educator of my kid, or do I need to send them to another school? Like, am I working full time, and do I need someone who can be in charge of educating my kid and also can be responsible? Like, do I need them, like, am I working from home? Can I have my kid in an online school at home, or do they have to be in person somewhere? And I think there's a lot of fundamental questions that people need to ask too about, like, well, we're a 2-income home and we don't really want to give that up, but, like, we could for a few years, and, like, maybe our kids' education is more important than getting a new Volvo. Like, there's really hard questions that people need to ask themselves too when they look at what the school system is doing and whether or not that is acceptable to them. But from a practical standpoint, like, once you kind of have a sense of what those specifications are that a school or an education option needs to meet, then you can start doing research and see what's available to you in your location. Are there in-person schools if you need your kid to go somewhere? Are there online schools that you can sign your kid up for if you're home all day and having them online is an option? There are some really, really cool schools that people are building that, and I'm really excited for like in 5 years when we have a whole like binder full of case studies that we can throw at people where it's like, look at all of these kids who are going through these programs. They're super successful. Like this, because I think that's what's a huge part of what's going to change the tide too, is like there's a set of early adopters who are just, they know this is going to work for their kids. They're hungry for it. They're not afraid to be the rebels.
Yeah.
But then there's a much larger cohort of people who want a safe option for their kids too, because this stuff is really scary. So once those case studies start to emerge, I think there's going to be a much bigger second wave of people that exit the system. And that's like really when the big shifts are going to happen. But there's tons of options like that for parents who are really busy. And there's also tons of options online for, like, if you don't have the monetary resources to put your kid in a school and you don't feel qualified to teach your kid at home, you really, like, if you know what a kid is like technically like needs to know in order to be meeting the standards of your state to be successfully completing an education, like they're not breaking the law because they're like learning the things they're supposed to. Like, as long as you know that, you don't have to be a subject matter expert in anything, because the internet has the best teachers in every subject your kid could possibly be curious about for free at your fingertips, a search away. And your kid can go learn from all of those people. And all you have to be is the facilitator who's helping them figure out how to find resources and then making sure they're constructively using them and then asking follow-up questions and figuring out what they need to learn next. Like, not knowing everything is not, it's a feature. It's not a bug for parents. Like, your kids are watching you figure it out, and they're learning just by nature of watching you figure it out way more than they ever would have learned in school, because they're learning how to learn, which school doesn't really teach you, but you have to know how to do to be successful in the adult world ever at all.
Yeah.
So, like, it's very intimidating for parents, I think, because, like, what's more important than your kid's education? But at the same time, like, what's more important than your kid's education? You need to make sure that you're asking the right questions to make sure that they're getting a really solid foundation for the rest of their lives. So it's tough for parents, I think, to figure out what's out there and where to start. But I also think, like, once you dig in, there's way more accessible, especially in the past couple of years, than there's ever been. And it's really easy to find stuff.
If you've made it this far into the show, it means I must be doing something right. Kibbe on Liberty is just one of the amazing products we created for the people. We tell emotionally compelling stories and produce educational videos for the Liberty curious. Our award-winning documentaries personalize all things liberty: independence, creativity, hard work, integrity, and perseverance. After the show, check out our work at freethepeople.org. And if you like what you see, donate to support what we do. That's freethepeople.org. Now back to the show. You know, I think one of the mythologies, and maybe you agree with this or not, I don't know, but the idea that the parent has to become the teacher. And I feel like there's a different word for it. You have to be the encourager. You have to be the mentor.
My mom always called herself my facilitator. I'd tell my friends my mom's my teacher, and she'd go, no, I'm your facilitator. Yeah. I really like that one.
Because you really want to teach young people how, or to let people figure out how to think.
Yeah.
And how to figure stuff out, and how to problem solve, and how to figure out what you want to do. And as you were saying earlier, like this regimented system doesn't do that. It tells you have to do this, and this, and maybe you don't care about that, and that.
Yeah, I think there's a level at which you're actually doing kids a disservice by being their teacher, because when you think about it, like, yes, when kids are 6 years old, they don't know a lot about how the world works. There's a lot of information that you need to be narrating to them and conveying to them to help them navigate this big adult world that they're just starting to step out into. But when you have kids who are 16, 17, 18, like, they're about to graduate from high school and go out and be full-fledged adults. And if you're telling them what to do all the time, and then there's like some magic date on the calendar where it's like, okay, congratulations, we've reached the date. Now you can go out into the real world and do all of this on your own. Like, you haven't prepared them at all for navigating adult reality. And so I think as kids get older, especially in middle school and high school, you really shouldn't be a teacher. which is a very radical stance to take, but I
Right.
think it's really true. Like you can't just tell them all the things that they need to know. You can't answer all their questions for you. You can't spoon feed them all the information. They have to know how to go find it themselves in order to be able to find information and synthesize it and use it, which is what they're going to be doing in the adult world.
Now, the moms we covered in our documentary were able to make the financial decision, some with some sacrifice, to have one parent. And in this case, it was the moms, but there's no particular reason why I should keep referring to moms. It's however families want to figure that stuff out. But obviously, the biggest barrier to this hits the community of people who are getting the most screwed by the government system, and that's moms that have to work, parents that have to work, maybe single-family homes. I have a friend who's a pastor in Harrisburg who is doing this facilitating, mentoring role at his church in a very poor community, and for legal and philosophical reasons, he's like, this is not a school, because he doesn't want the state government to define him as a school, because that creates all sorts of regulatory barriers to actually succeeding. But he's just, he is providing daycare, which is an essential, fundamental barrier for working parents to do this stuff. Can you talk more about these alternative solutions that are emerging, if you know of any, that might help solve this? Because Pastor Josh is doing that, but we need many, many more of him to solve this problem. Most parents don't have a guy that's that insightful and that innovative to create that opportunity.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different things. I think what he is doing is one of the paths and one of the models that are going to emerge that's going to solve this problem. Like there are lots of similar ways that the free market can solve this issue for parents. But there's some interesting startups that are being built they're setting up. Some of them call them like self-directed learning centers or some version of that, where they're not really providing a curriculum. Kids are coming in. It's a place for kids to go. It's kind of like a WeWork for kids.
Yeah.
So kids can go during the workday. Their parents can like drop them off and pick them up at whatever times the parents are coming in and out of their workday. And the kids can go to this space, and it's full of supplies and equipment and toys and like things to, like educational materials for the kids to use, but they're kind of each doing their own thing. So some of them might be an online school, some of them might be unschooled, and it's like, hey, go, like we're gonna just go craft today or whatever. They don't need a lot of direction. And there's a lot of different models of these self-directed learning centers too. Like some of them are more a little more anarchistic, and some of them are a little more structured.
Logan's excited. You dropped the A word.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of that
Beautiful
that's starting
anarchy.
to emerge. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, as kids, like
Yeah.
child anarchy is usually quite lovely. They're like coloring and building cool Lego castles, and it's pretty awesome. But those types of things I think are going to build traction. I think the micro school model is really interesting too, because it's bringing back there's a great historical precedent for this, the neighborhood school.
Yeah.
And there's a really interesting company based out of Arizona called Prenda that works with states that have either an ESA program or some type of grant money to use state funding to pay for a micro school. So they use, I think there's 4 states besides Arizona that they're in where they're using like the charter laws to fund this. And they're working to expand how many states they're working with. But basically, the state funding that would be following the student to a public school goes to a micro school that's set up by Prenda. And usually it's a parent who signs on with Prenda to start it, and that parent, that mom or dad, becomes the teacher of the school. Mm-hmm. And they'll host a school like in their living room or in their, whatever, their barn or whatever. And they'll have 10 neighborhood kids come in. And in a state like Arizona, where every kid gets about $7,000 with the ESA program to use on an education program, that's, if you have 10 kids, that's $70,000 to fund the school. You spend 50 or 60 of that to pay the teacher. So the mom isn't really giving up her ability to work. She's just like working, running the school, and then the rest of the money goes to back to Prenda HQ to keep the whole operation running. But I think things like that are going to start to emerge too, where there's like creative ways to provide these types of resources on a community level for cheap or for free. And there's a lot of, I think people underestimate too how much power they have in a community if you can find other people who want the same things that you do. Like when I was growing up homeschooled, I knew families who, like there were a couple moms who would tag team, like they were both working part-time because neither of them could support, like they couldn't just subsist off of a one income household. So both moms were working part-time and they were able to like structure their schedule so one or the other of them was working and the other one had both sets of kids. There are people who get like grandparents involved. There's all different types of ways that people solve this problem. And I honestly think the way that they're doing it is kind of modeling the most natural way of doing it, which is like if a whole community of people want something better, they can. And I think those communities of people are starting to emerge at a level that they didn't exist before. Like 10 years ago, you wanted to homeschool in your community. Everybody thought you were a whack job. But now.
Imagine the idea you're so radical, the idea that communities could be support structures for families and neighborhoods. I don't know, like I could go down the whole rabbit hole of how government policies have destroyed that support system and that network that helps people or allows people to help each other. And what you're describing is basically a more formalized, sustainable version of a learning pod.
Yeah, there are a lot of those that people are trying to build to make it as easy as possible for parents to find this and tap into it.
Yeah. You said earlier that you decided not to go to college. Mm-hmm. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Brian Kaplan, who has written a critique of which kind of audacious for him since he is a college professor. But he basically argues that it's not worth going to college unless you desperately need the credential that a 4-year degree will give you in certain professions. But you decided not to. A lot of parents right now are trying to figure out if they want to go $100K in debt for a college degree that's just going to screw up their kids and not be worth the paper it's written on. Do you do this stuff too? Like, I assume you have thoughts on this.
I do. Yeah. Well, I think this is actually a really important question to ask pretty early on as you're thinking about your kids' education, because so much of K through 12 is built around the assumption that kids need to go to college. Therefore, K through 12 is really about college preparation. Like so much of it
Gotta pass the test.
Exactly. And when you take away that assumption, the whole world opens up in terms of what K through 12 could look like. It's like, well, what if my kid learned like reading, math, like the basics? They learn how to read, they learn how to write, they learn basic arithmetic, and then we send them to like they go do an apprenticeship or something in middle school and high school, or they start a business, or they do something else that's not giving you the paper trail that would lead to a college acceptance, but it's actually really setting them way far ahead of everybody else in terms of like career readiness and life readiness. So I think it's a really important question. I'm very much in the camp of if you don't need it for something, like if you don't want to be a doctor, you don't want to be a lawyer, you don't want to be a public school teacher, which I think is kind of obvious how I feel about that path. Yeah. Like if you don't want to do these things that require the piece of paper, then why would you go? Again, everything's available online. Like MIT has all of their courses for free online. You can go get an MIT education. Harvard has a bunch of open classes. Yale does. Like you can go get an Ivy League education on your own time from your laptop while you're working and come out just as far ahead as everybody else. Like the only things that you're missing are the networking component, which you can 100% replace through the internet, and the piece of paper. But the piece of paper also becomes irrelevant really quickly once you start building a portfolio of things you've actually done in the real world. Like I talk about not having a college education all of the time because it's a part of the story of like how I ended up where I did, and I think it's important. But nobody's ever asked me if I have a degree or if I like. It's never been an impediment.
If I had said that, the reaction would have been different, I suspect, because at this point it's probably more obvious that a college degree quite often might have just messed up your brain, or just not worth anything. Like you learned how to drink beer and and
Got really good at beer pong.
checked the right boxes when you got those tests.
Yeah.
But today, like I think, I'm thinking of Peter Thiel is creating billionaires by encouraging them to leave college and just pursue the idea that they have, and that's kind of what Praxis is as well. So you went from high school or homeschooling. Do you call homeschooling high school?
Yeah, I was homeschooled through high school.
Okay.
Yeah, homeschool, high school, whatever.
Just because
Yes.
it would be too confusing not to say that.
Yeah, otherwise it sounds like I went to public school,
Yeah.
which I did actually dually enroll for a semester. I took one class at my high school because I wanted to know what it was like. I wanted to test my assumptions. It was terrible.
Yeah.
I was not a fan. I did not go back.
Yeah. Did you go to Praxis right out of school?
So I hacked Praxis. So I didn't actually do the program. I interned for them for a very long time. I was an incredibly stubborn intern. I just wouldn't leave until they gave me a job eventually. But I went through. So I basically got.
It's a great
Praxis.
strategy. She's so annoying. She's not going to leave until we give her a job.
So she keeps doing stuff. So
Yeah.
we don't really want to let her go. At least that was the assumption I was banking on.
That was a strategy.
I won eventually. But yeah, there was a year-long stint where or was it a year? Yeah, I think it was about a year where I was teaching writing classes. I was working on a farm. I was I was writing a bunch. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I didn't know. But yeah, it was effectively straight from high school to Praxis.
And you were there how long?
I worked there full-time for 3 years. I was there total for 6 because of my intern time before they hired me full-time. And then I stayed on working as a coach for like a year and a half after I left full-time because I just really loved it.
Yeah.
So 6 years.
So, and from there you started Rebel Educator?
Yeah, I went and worked as a freelancer for a while, working on a bunch of different education, with some different education startups. I did a little bit of work with Foundation for Economic Education. I did a fellowship with them. And then started Rebel Educator this past spring.
And how's it going?
I'm having a great time because I get to talk about education all day. It's been amazing. So I have a really amazing team of people working with me to build this. I have some incredibly talented writers that I feel very lucky to get to work with. And we're trying to build, again, a content library, a starting point, a launch pad for parents who we want to be the thing that comes up when people Google my kid's not happy in school. We want to have answers for them because right now there aren't any. So it's been really amazing to I spend a lot of time on Twitter every day talking to people, and I've met some incredibly interesting people, everything from parents to educators to people who are leaving the education system, people who are building startups that are trying to tackle this problem with providing either one-off resources or full-on schools to people. It's been really interesting, actually. I've always been in this world, but being so deep, every day I wake up and all I think about is talking to people in education, and I've learned a lot about how much is happening. I knew about a lot of these things already, but talking to people who are deeply in it, I actually think there's more momentum here than I realized when I started, which makes me very excited. I think so many people are ready for this, and I think it's going to become I think education's a very underrepresented issue for a couple reasons. One, it's just not as sexy as politics are. It just doesn't have quite the allure to it, just kind of on a cultural assumptions level. But also a lot of intellectuals don't have kids, so they don't care about it as much. People are kind of yeah, someday when I have kids, then I'll think about education. But if you're 22 years old and you're yeah, maybe in a decade when I'm 32, 35, I'll think about having a kid. And then when they're, 10 years from then, they'll be in the throes of elementary school, and maybe then I'll start to care. It's the people who are in education right now are the ones who are going to be setting up the world that your kids are in. They're the ones who will be graduated and running the schools that your kids are going to. It matters now. Yeah. There will be no good schools for your kids to go to if you don't care about it. But I think people are starting to wake up. I think people are starting to realize that this is important, and that this is something that I think it matters to more people than it did before. And I think, again, there's so much momentum post-COVID, and it's really a question now of how much can the momentum get harnessed, and what case studies are going to emerge out of this, what like what success stories, what programs are going to emerge that people are talking about that's going to carry the momentum and excitement before it fades. But I also don't think it's going to. I think people are really, I think parents are really fed up with the status quo system now that they realize what's going on. And I think it's going to be very hard to close the floodgates again. I'm also a chronic optimist, which for better or worse, but I do think that there's something different here. The energy is different than there was 3 years ago, and it's significant.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love Liberty and look cool. I tend to be very optimistic about the ability of free people to solve problems without anyone dictating what the rules are. But I also think that, as shocked as I was that the teachers' union so overstepped their credibility, I think that they're now going to rush back to fix the problem. And I think, they're already they're acknowledging that the pandemic, not the lockdowns, but the pandemic did horrible damage to children's educations and their mental health and all the things that many of us were predicting from the day that they started it. But I think the empire is going to strike back. And I think that the education industrial complex is going to try to stop you and all of the parents you're talking about from doing what is natural, which is to innovate and solve the problem and think of better ways to create better lives for their children. What are those things that they could do to stop you?
I mean, there's a lot. And we saw hints of this in this most recent election where people changed their stance on education leading up to the election because they knew that it was such a hot button issue, and people who, like, candidates who didn't care as much about education as their opponents, but who said just enough to not offend anybody, were able to get elected.
Corey talked about this. I forget the names.
I'm sure he did. Yeah. Well, it happened in Pennsylvania with Shapiro.
That's right.
And there are some other examples of this too. But so I think that is, in the short term, like, one of the dangers is, like,
well, it's almost a baby step in the right direction. Like, I don't expect politicians to do the right thing for children.
No.
But I do expect politicians to respond to incentives, and if parents are willing to stay committed to that process that they ignited at school board meetings, politics will follow. Even though the incentive structure is, teachers unions spend a lot of money buying the political process, but there's a lot more parents than there are members of the teachers union.
There are a lot more parents. I think, like, the ESA movement is going to be a mixed bag. It's going to be really good in the short term. In the long term, it has a lot of potential for legislators to step in and really heavily regulate these schools that are emerging.
Dictate how you spend and where you spend.
There's going to be, it's an important first battle, but it is not the only battle. We're not going to have won the war after this battle is over, because there are going to be more fights that have to be tackled with, like, making sure that the integrity of these alternative schools stay true to what they were intended to be. I think, down the road we're going to be having conversations about, like, well, how do schools, like, what schools aren't accepting this funding because they want to not be regulated, in the same way that your friend in Harrisburg is not calling what he's doing a school because he wants to bypass the regulation. I think, there's always going to be some of that. I think that will start to emerge. I think there's a lot of, the momentum is very on our side, but there's a lot of, it's hard to break the status quo and to do something different. Inertia is a very powerful force. And so if the teachers and the teachers unions can do just enough to pacify the parents to make it not really worth the effort of leaving, that will kill the momentum very quickly. And I think we're going to see attempts at that too. I don't know how far the pendulum's swung. Like, I talk to a lot of people who are very fed up and they just want out. But there are also a lot of parents who are like, for whatever reason, they like really fed up, but their kids are still in public school and they're not really thinking about pulling them out. And I think like, I don't think there's like, I think there's a spectrum of approaches that parents can take. Like there's a lot if your kids are in public school, there's still a lot you can do to supplement their education. Like most parents aren't. So if you're even doing little things, like you're reading aloud as a family, you're going to museums, you're doing hands-on projects, you're encouraging your kids to like start some entrepreneurial venture, like anything like that is already setting your kid ahead and undoing some of the damage that public school is doing. So it's not like this one size fits all, like we either have to leave entirely or we've lost. Like there's a lot of middle ground that is also good. But I do think that we're going to see a lot of pushback from or course correction from the teachers unions and from politicians. And
well, I assume they'll demonize there is like there's a point where not using the public schools is normal or more normal, where enough parents are doing it that you as a parent won't feel guilty for experimenting. Like your parents had no qualms experimenting with you.
No, but my parents also are very they're very unafraid of being the odd ones out. I got very lucky with my parents. They just like weren't afraid to go do this thing in a time when it was like 20 years ago there weren't nearly as many people homeschooling as there are now. It was a much weirder thing to do.
But I can imagine the peer pressure when families are getting together and they're like, you're doing what with your children?
Yes. And
like that's intimidating. I keep using that word, but it's there's barriers to that. But this is like any market product, right? Like there are first movers and there's people that buy the first iPhone, and then eventually everyone has to have one. And so we're there. But I suspect that the next step, I don't know what they'll do, but they'll probably do what they always do, what they did to homeschoolers and what they do to any sort of innovation outside of the public school system, is they'll demonize it as bad for kids and that's not education, and you're destroying these children's futures.
They already do. I mean, the whole domestic terrorism thing for homeschooling, like they've already gone. I
feel like
they
jumped the shark on that one.
They did a little bit.
Yeah.
It was a very memeable thing to say, and
those folks were not that scary.
Yeah, it was a little too fast.
But they'll go that far. Is your point?
Yeah. They already have. They'll do it again.
Yeah.
And I think. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of. I mean, I get this all the time on Twitter and in response to the articles that I write. People like, there are people I've gotten hate DMs for writing articles promoting homeschooling, and I'm confused by it, but I'm also amazed. I'm like, wow, I didn't know it was quite this vicious, the hatred of this movement. But I think the teachers unions 100% are going to come out guns blazing. It's a question of like, how much do people care about the opinions of the teachers unions anymore? And I think that's a very fair question after everything that's happened over the past 3 years. I think they don't have the same level of respect that they did anymore. So I'm not sure people are quite as scared of them as they used to be.
Maybe Elon Musk will sort out the education industrial bots after he gets the media bots out of there. It's a process. Be okay. It's a process.
Yes.
So where do people find your company and your products, and where do we find you on Twitter?
Yeah, so everything is just under Rebel Educator. On Twitter, we're at Rebel Educator. You can find me personally, too, at Hannah Frankman. I manage both accounts, so you can DM me on either one. Our website is rebeleducator.co, and that's a good jumping off point for everything else. We have a Substack newsletter that goes out every week if you're into that sort of thing. We have a podcast that's about to launch that you can check out. Those are the best places to start. And then again, like on the website, we have everything curated. So from there, you can find everything else that we do and everything else that we promote. So if you're looking for like specific schools and stuff, we've got lists of those there too.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay. Thanks for doing this. Let's get together in a year or so and do this again and be even more optimistic about the future of education and the untimely death of the education industrial complex.
The very timely death.
Death.
Untimely in the other direction. It's overdue, but yes, let's definitely.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.